Hi, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. In this week's video, we're in session number 3 of our new program entitled Update on the QME Regulations. And the purpose of this program is to bring you up to date and up to speed on the new passage of the new QME Regulations effective February 2024. And this is being recorded in late April 2024 to share with you what is now becoming disseminated throughout the group is the new passage, even though there's been as yet no formal announcement, is the new passage of the new QME regulations, which have been in process going through public comment period and revisions over the last at least 3 years to the best of my recollections. It's been at least 3 years since there's been new proposed changes to the QME regulations, and they've been written, rewritten, and raked over the coals X number of times to bring them to their final form that have just recently become written into law, retroactive to February 2024. So in session number 1 of this program, we went through a brief overview of some of the most important changes that are going to impact your day-to-day operations as a busy qualified medical evaluator. And I went through what I consider to be the most important and the most relevant to us as qualified medical evaluators, and that you specifically need to be aware of. And I shared with you some specific changes that you can implement immediately to align your QME practice to be in compliance with the new QME regulations. And then in our last session, session number 2, we talked about what the new QME regulations have to say about timelines for scheduling our initial and reevaluation appointments. And then with that knowledge established, meaning with the information from the new QME regulations relating to scheduling our appointments established, I share with you some ideas from the trenches as to how you can modify your own scheduling procedures such that when you receive an intake call for a new QME evaluation with you as the qualified medical evaluator, how you can assure that that appointment is a solid, compensable appointment that will come to fruition versus an appointment that will not come to fruition and will only cause you to spin your wheels and to spend emotion and administrative time and cost in setting up what was actually a poor quality appointment from the beginning. And I showed you how to separate out the high quality appointment requests from the low quality appointment requests so that you can spend your time efficiently, productively, and profitably in this new era of doing medical legal evaluations. In today's session, I want to spend some time talking about the new anti-bias regulations that are now into law for the first time ever. So we're entering now into a historic era, which I refer to as the anti-bias era. And I'll show you what the DWC's plan is to stamp out once and for all bias in the medical legal evaluation, which has been rampant since the beginning of time, even up until today. And the Division of Workers' Compensation has now written into law a comprehensive plan to address this issue. And in today's session, I'll share with you some of the history behind what brings us to this point in time. And I'll share with you the DWC's plan to work proactively and interactively with the qualified medical evaluator throughout the life cycle of the qualified medical evaluator's career. And I'll share with you more details about exactly what that means and exactly what that means for you in today's session. In our next several sessions, we're going to talk about some other important changes to the QME regulations that will have a direct impact on you, on your day-to-day operations, and on your procedures moving forward. So you need to pay attention to these series of sessions, and you need to take to heart what I'm going to share with you, because now is the time that you are required to make some changes in your procedures, because these new regulations are now effective. and the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to be ramping up their expectations on us to be in compliance with the new QME regulations. So in our next session, I'll talk about evaluation and reporting guidelines, and I'll share with you what the new regulations have to say about what's expected of us in completing our evaluations and in completing our QME reports, such that what we put out is a high quality product that can be used to resolve disputed issues in the system. And I'm going to show you how to actually leverage these new requirements to create for yourself a competitive advantage in the marketplace, such that the volume of cases coming to you for your evaluation as the qualified medical evaluator increases to the point where you will eventually become avalanched with requests for appointments if you'll simply adopt what I want to share with you in that session. In our next session, we'll talk about electronic service of records and how you can use electronic service of records to increase the efficiency and the profitability of your QME practice, whether that be a large practice or a small practice. Electronic service of records is a great innovation. It's not brand new with the new QME regulations, but it's relatively new here in the post-COVID era. And it's an innovation that increases the efficiency and the cost effectiveness of your QME practice, both of which are good things, both of which I'm a great fan. So whether you have a small QME practice or a large QME practice, or whether you're running a volume service where you're managing the reports of other evaluators, electronic service of records is all good. And I'll share with you some of those benefits when we get to that session. And then finally, in one of our last sessions, I'm going to talk to you about what the Division of Workers' Compensation has now written into law, meaning written into the new QME regulations, about those circumstances where our reappointment as a qualified medical evaluator, which occurs every 2 years, we reappoint as QMEs every 2 years, the situations where the Division of Workers' Compensation can deny our reappointment application or our request for reappointment as a qualified medical evaluator. And the purpose of the new regulations, which deny reappointment of qualified medical evaluators, is simply an effort by the Division of Workers' Compensation to weed out the bad apple QMEs that just cannot seem to catch on to the spirit of the work that we do. And there will always be bad apples and there will always be bad actors. And now the Division of Workers' Compensation has added a couple new situations wherein they can exercise their authority to deny reappointment application of qualified medical evaluators. And I'm going to share with you what those new circumstances are so that you can avoid that trap and so that you can continue to enjoy a long, happy, healthy, and profitable career as a qualified medical evaluator without scrutiny from the Division of Workers' Compensation. So with that as an introduction and a reminder as to where we've come from so far in this program, let's pick up where we left off and continue on our new program entitled Update on the QME Regulations. And today we're going to talk about the Division of Workers' Compensation's plan for addressing bias in the workers' compensation system in general and in the medical legal evaluation, specifically in the work that we do as qualified. Okay, so let's begin. And in today's session, we're talking about how the Division of Workers' Compensation plans, through the passage of the new QME regulations, how the DWC plans to stamp out and eliminate bias in the medical legal evaluation. So the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to present and is going to impose a 5-step plan for the elimination of bias in the medical legal evaluation. And this plan is going to span the entire life cycle of a qualified medical evaluator, including pre-QME prospective applicants, including active, current, and existing QMEs. And the plan has as its purpose to provide continuing training, continuing education, to provide a continuing spotlight on the issue of bias throughout our careers as qualified medical evaluators in the hopes to eventually and consistently, increment by increment, to remove bias and stereotyping from our medical decision-making processes. So let's go over that 5-step plan. So the 5-step plan begins at the very beginning of the career or the life cycle of a qualified medical evaluator, and it imposes certain requirements on prospective QME applicants who are applying to sit for the QME competency exam. Those applicants are going to be required to undergo training in anti-bias and anti-discrimination, so-called anti-bias training, prior to becoming eligible to even sit to take the QME competency examination. And this new regulation is written into law into California Code of Regulation 11, Section H. These are the eligibility requirements to sit for the QME competency examination. So that begins before a QME is even actually a QME. The training begins even before sitting for the competency examination. So that has to deal with training before actual even initial appointment as a qualified medical evaluator. Then, during the period of time where a qualified medical evaluator is active and actively engaged in conducting face-to-face evaluations, the Division of Workers' Compensation has a plan to increase their requirement, to increase their scrutiny, to increase their oversight, to increase their monitoring over the QME's compliance with existing regulation, California Code of Regulation 40. Now, this is not a new regulation written into the new QME regulations. This is an existing regulation that's been in existence for years and perhaps even decades. But now, as a part of their overall plan to eradicate bias in the medical legal evaluation, the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to increase its monitoring to ensure compliance with this existing regulation. This is existing regulation CCR 40, known as the disclosure requirements. This is not new, and this is a procedure. The disclosure requirements describes a procedure that takes place during the face-to-face evaluation that sets the tone at the face-to-face evaluation to encourage the qualified medical evaluator to be a neutral evaluator, to be an objective evaluator, to be an unbiased evaluator. It serves as a reminder to us, to all of us, to have our game face on for neutrality at the face-to-face evaluation. And it's this regulation that the Division of Workers' Compensation wants to ensure that we comply with, and that we actually go through this procedure at the face-to-face evaluation with each and every examinee. So this is an existing regulation that the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to increase its monitoring on to ensure that we actually comply with the requirements of that existing regulation. So this is a requirement or part of the plan for existing active QMEs. Then, now brand new in the new QME regulations, is new regulation 35.5H, which is going to describe a new and mandatory declaration that will go in the disclosure sections of our reports. And I can tell you that I have already installed this declaration now into my templates and to all of my clients' templates, such that we are already in compliance with this new regulation, 35.5H. And I will provide this new declaration for you as part of your handout materials for today's discussion, so that you can have it and so that you can install this into your template as well. And we're going to go over this declaration here in a couple minutes, but suffice to say now, for the purposes of this slide, that this declaration is going to go into every single one of your reports from now on. And this declaration is going to serve as a last-minute check for each of us to run a quick scan over our QME reports and confirm to ourselves before we sign the report, thereby confirming to all parties that indeed our report is free from bias against any party to the evaluation, meaning against the injured worker, against the claims administrator, against the applicant attorney, against the defense attorney, in other words, against all parties associated with the evaluation, and that our face-to-face evaluation and the opinions and conclusions in our written report are all free from bias, such that all of the opinions and conclusions of our report are accurate and are not colored by all of our preconceived notions, our stereotypes, and our implicit biases, such that the injured worker can receive benefits that are accurate for the particular circumstances of the case. So the purpose of this mandatory declaration is to help ensure the accuracy of our final opinions and conclusions. And I'll share with you the exact language of this mandatory declaration. So this is something that's brand new now, part of the new QME regulations, that's going to be a part of your life for every evaluation that you complete. So this is going to be an ongoing sort of checks and balance for us to assure that our reports indeed are free from bias. And then again, and also on an ongoing basis, there's two additional components of the DWC's plan. Number one has to deal with continuing education programs for existing QMEs. And as you know, we as QMEs currently, well, I shouldn't say currently, I should say before the adoption of the new QME regulations effective February 2024, our former educational requirements were that we complete 12 hours of continuing education every 2 years in order to reapply for reappointment as a QME. This continuing education requirements have changed. The number of hours of continuing education that are required have been increased from 12 to 16. And as part of that increase, some of that increase, in fact 2 hours of that increase, is now going to be required to be devoted to anti-bias training. So it might not sound a lot, and it's not a lot, but it's something. Those 2 hours every 2 years on an ongoing basis has as its hopes, it hopes to keep these issues at the forefront of our consciousness and to constantly serve as a form of encouragement for us to constantly be aware of how bias can creep into the opinions and conclusions of our evaluations so that we can progressively become more and more accurate qualified medical evaluators. So that's the purpose of the new QME continuing education requirements. And then in addition, and finally, the fifth component of the plan is for those bad apples who cannot seem to offer opinions and conclusions in the body of their report that are not colored by bias and stereotyping and preconceived notions and implicit biases and all of these things that color our judgments. The DWC has a plan to deny those qualified medical evaluators reappointment such that as a group we continue to progress towards a group that's less and less affected by bias in our medical legal reporting. And the Division of Workers' Compensation's final component of the plan is simply to eliminate biased evaluators from the system, to eliminate evaluators who have a history, who have an established history of providing biased opinions and conclusions in their report. That's the final act, the final attempt by the Division of Workers' Compensation to steer this ship towards more and more neutrality and objectivity, the way that it's actually intended to be. So you can see that this plan spans the entire life cycle of the qualified medical evaluator, from the pre-qualified medical evaluator eligibility requirements to ongoing monitoring of our application and utilization of the disclosure requirements, to our constant reminder in each and every report through the use of a mandatory declaration, and then again through ongoing and continuing education programs throughout the lifespan of the qualified medical evaluator. So this is a comprehensive plan that the Division of Workers' Compensation has now written into law in an effort to counteract this pernicious and pervasive problem of bias in the medical legal evaluation. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the components of bias so that we can get a jump start on these new regulations, and so that we can begin ourselves to become more neutral, unbiased, and objective evaluators. So in an effort to usher in a new generation of more neutral, more objective, and more unbiased evaluators, new regulation CCR 11, now written into law, attempts to address prospective qualified medical evaluators. And let's go through the exact language of CCR 11 so that you can understand the intention, the DWC's intention behind enacting this particular regulation now into law. It says that Section H says that prior to appointment as a QME, each prospective QME applicant shall complete a course of at least 2 hours in anti-bias training. 2 hours in anti-bias training. So this is new. So those of you who remember back when you were applying to become a qualified medical evaluator, if you were a chiropractor, you were required to go through a 44-hour comprehensive program to obtain your industrial injury evaluator credential. Only after achieving that credential could you apply to sit for the QME competency examination. For non-chiropractic providers, the requirement was that you complete a 12-hour report writing course, after which you could then receive your QME credential, assuming, of course, that you had passed the QME competency examination. Now, I can tell you I'm a provider of the 12-hour report writing course, and the 12-hour report writing course is now changing. It's now becoming a 16-hour report writing course, and part of the additional 4 hours is going to consist of at least 2 hours in anti-bias training. And the curricula, or the topics to be discussed in this additional 2 hours, is now established in law and written into law by the Division of Workers' Compensation. And let's talk about exactly what that additional 2 hours is going to consist of. So it says, the course shall include the following. Now, it can include more than the following, but it cannot include less than the following. So what this says, when we review what it says by the following, what we're going to learn is we're going to learn what topics are of great concern to the Division of Workers' Compensation. So topic number 1, which we're going to go over a little bit more in a few minutes, is number 1 is instruction that's designed to increase awareness and understanding of differences in human experience, as well as awareness of implicit or unconscious bias, stereotyping, and discrimination, and the ways in which all of these, such as unconscious bias, such as stereotyping, such as discrimination, can unintentionally, so through no fault of us, it's unintentional, it's not intentional, but it's unintentional, and how these biases can unintentionally impact our perceptions and therefore our decision making, including in our medical evaluations and reporting, This is new language written into the law, and then therefore can lead to disparities in healthcare strategies, the purpose of which is to help eliminate or reduce implicit bias in medical evaluations and reporting. And reporting means through the issuance of our QME reports. So what this is designed to do, I can tell you, the purpose of this new training is to help increase our awareness about these problems of biases, and how these biases creep into our evaluations and into our medical legal reports, so that we can address these biases such that the opinions and conclusions that we offer in our QME reports are more accurate, because these problems, such as bias, stereotyping, discrimination, these problems serve, or I should say have as their net effect, to reduce the accuracy of our opinions and conclusions. They reduce the accuracy, thereby affecting the benefits that injured workers are entitled to under law. So the purpose of this provision now written into law is to help our reports to be more accurate, such that the provision of benefits or the denial of benefits, whatever the case may be, whatever the opinion may be, such that that opinion is actually an accurate opinion. So in my estimation, in my opinion, this is a good thing, and I'm looking forward to continually learning more and more and more about how my own stereotypes, my own biases, and my own experiences through life affect and color and create inaccuracies in my own medical legal reporting. So this is topic number one. That's of great importance to qualified medical evaluators in an effort to attack the problem of unconscious bias. So let's define this term of unconscious bias. Well, here's a term taken right off of Webster's dictionary.com. It tells us that unconscious or implicit bias, implicit bias is the opposite of explicit bias. This is inherent inside biases, sometimes that we're not even aware of, versus explicit biases, which we are aware of. These are defined as underlying attitudes and stereotypes that people, such as you and I, unconsciously, meaning it's not conscious, this is unconscious, so this is through no fault of our own and through no intention of our own, that we unconsciously attribute to another person or group of people, such as who? Such as injured workers as individuals, or such as injured workers as they exist as a group of people. So, for example, a group of people such as warehouse workers, or farmers, or Hispanics, or immigrants, or office workers, or manufacturing workers, or whatever the group may be. We have these biases both towards the person as an individual and also to the type of group that person can be traced, or that we believe that person may belong to. And these attitudes and stereotypes affect how we understand and engage with a person or a group of person, that create inaccuracies in our opinions and conclusions that therefore inaccurately affect the benefits that are provided to these particular persons or groups of persons. Okay? So there's a basic definition of unconscious and implicit bias. Let's explore this idea a little bit deeper and take a look at how we ourselves harbor these unconscious and implicit biases and other stereotypes. Okay, so let's explore this concept of implicit bias a little bit deeper. So I did a little bit of research on this topic, and I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist, but I am a qualified medical evaluator who wants to do a better job, wants to do a more accurate job, and wants to be a more objective and neutral evaluator. So I did some research on this, and I want to share with you what I discovered in the hopes that it will help you as it's helped me as well. So I went to Wikipedia and I did some research and I looked up these terms, and I learned that implicit bias or implicit stereotype is the pre-reflective attribution of particular qualities by an individual, and here we're talking about by us, by you and I as qualified medical evaluators, to a member of some social outgroup, that outgroup being some group not associated with us ourselves, or some outgroup that we ourselves are not a member of that group. Okay, so let's explore some of these ideas. These ideas are a bit deep and maybe foreign to some of you as they were to me. So let's explore some of these ideas. So first of all, let's take a look at what it means to talk about the pre-reflective attribution. Pre-reflective. You can probably see that this has to deal with before. Pre-reflective means before we've had an opportunity to actually reflect upon what's happening. So it's pre-reflective. And then it involves the attribution, where we attribute certain qualities before we even think about it to a member of a social outgroup, not a member of our own social in-group. So this applies to us perfectly as qualified medical evaluators, where we go to the medical evaluation and we are a member of the medical evaluator doctor group, and we're addressing members of the injured worker group, in outgroup, relative to our own social grouping as medical evaluators. So let's define this a little bit more. And this again comes from Wikipedia, and I'm just going to read it to you. The term pre-reflective attribution here refers to the process by which individuals, such as ourselves, make spontaneous and automatic inferences or judgments about the causes of behaviors or events such as incidences of workplace injuries, for example. Okay, and I'm just making this up to make it relevant to us. And this is done without conscious awareness or deliberate reflection. Okay, it's unconscious. So it's no fault of our own, but it does take place, and we need to be aware of the phenomenon, because this is something that impacts the accuracy of our opinions or conclusions. So it says that this concept of pre-reflective attribution falls within the broader study of social cognition. And we'll mention social cognition again in a couple moments. Specifically in the context of attribution theory, which explains how people explain the behaviors of themselves and others. And we do this in the face-to-face evaluation. So pre-reflective attributions are immediate and often based on implicit biases. They occur before any conscious reflective thought takes place, hence the prefix pre-reflective. These judgments are influenced by an individual's past experiences, and past experiences can go all the way back into our childhood. They're based on an individual's cultural background, and they're based on the immediate perceptual cues available in the environment. So we use all of these sources of information, sometimes collected over our entire lifespan, to make decisions and to make decisions. So they give an example here in Wikipedia. They say, for example, if someone trips and falls, a pre-reflective attribution might lead an observer, such as us as a qualified medical evaluator, to instantly think that the person is clumsy, that the fault of the slip and fall was due to the person, without considering potential external factors like a slippery floor. This type of attribution is rapid and typically operates at a subconscious level, shaping our perceptions and interactions with others in ways that we are not always aware of. So we need to be aware of this. We need to be aware of this phenomenon that we have a tendency naturally and unconsciously to pre-reflectively attribute our perceptions onto situations and circumstances that may not be accurate. Okay, so let's continue, and this is from Wikipedia. Implicit biases and stereotypes are thought to be shaped by experience and based on learned associations between particular qualities and social categories, including race and or gender, etc. And the Division of Workers' Compensation has delineated many more social categories than simply just race and gender. The Division of Workers' Compensation is targeting many categories such as race, gender, nation of origin, religious preference, sexual preference, etc. Those are the main ones. We'll review the exact ones here in just a couple moments. So Wikipedia tells us that an individual's perceptions and behaviors can be influenced by the implicit stereotypes that they hold, even if they are sometimes unaware that they hold such stereotypes. Implicit bias is an aspect of implicit social cognition, which is the phenomenon that perceptions, attitudes, and stereotypes can operate prior to conscious intention or endorsement. So very, very fascinating, and the more aware we can become, first of all, of this as a general concept, number one, and then number two, as to how we ourselves engage in this pre-reflective attribution of various qualities and characteristics to our injured worker examinees, the better and more accurate and the more objective evaluators we can be. The whole purpose of which is to provide more accurate benefits for injured workers who deserve and need those benefits. Okay, so the purpose of all of this awareness and understanding, which is now going to be built into the education and continuing education of qualified medical evaluators, is to enhance the accuracy of the provision of benefits, or the provision of accurate benefits throughout the workers' compensation system. The number two important topic that's going to now be mandatory in the continuing or the pre-education of prospective qualified medical evaluators is going to include at least one example of a potential gender bias in a fictitious QME evaluation in which an apportionment rating is made based on an assumption about a risk factor related solely to the injured worker's gender. Now you'll notice that this is actually a very specific requirement. It talks about gender bias with an apportionment rating that's based about a risk factor. In other words, this is not something that could be made up. This is something that has been specifically designed by the Division of Workers' Compensation, and there's a reason for it. The reason for it is that there have been cases in the past where persons and groups of persons have alleged that the workers' compensation system in general is biased, is gender biased, and specifically gender biased against women, such that women receive inadequate benefits due to gender bias in the workers' compensation system. And it's this particular section of CCR 11H that addresses that issue, such that this issue ceases to be an issue moving forward. And then finally, the new continuing education requirements for prospective QMEs is going to include at least one example relating to an evaluation and rating of permanent disability resulting from industrial breast cancer. Now, both male and females can have breast cancer, but again, this is specifically was triggered, this requirement was specifically triggered by women who alleged and brought suit against the Department of Industrial Relations for what they described as gender bias and gender discrimination in the provision of benefits, disability benefits, for injured worker female women who developed industrial breast cancer. So the purpose of this training is to take into account, or to help to learn to begin to take into account the many ways in which gender bias could potentially impact an assessment of the impairment that results from breast cancer and the treatment therefrom, the treatment for breast cancer. So again, this is a very specific requirement, and the purpose of this requirement is to address a need that's been established over years and years by women who have alleged that the workers' compensation system, specifically relating to industrial breast cancer cases, is biased and discriminatory. And this bias and discriminatory history leads to inadequate and inaccurate benefits, disability benefits in this case, for injured workers, specifically for female injured workers. Okay, so the purpose of that new regulation, CCR Regulation 11, is to train new prospective QMEs about this issue, about how bias can creep into the medical legal evaluation such that it doesn't, okay? So that particular regulation targets new prospective QMEs to help them get off on the right foot. Now, once the QME gains the QME credential, and for all of us who have our existing QME credential, the DWC's plan to continue to attack bias in the medical legal evaluation has to do with increased monitoring of existing regulation CCR 40. And I can tell you that the Division of Workers' Compensation regularly reviews our reports, and one of the things that they specifically look for in our reports is our compliance with these disclosure requirements, which are described in CCR 40. So let me read for you the language of Section 2 of CCR 40 such that you can take this to heart, and also that if you're not employing this procedure in your evaluation, that you can install this procedure into your very next face-to-face evaluation. And I can tell you that this is an important procedure to do. This is not something that you want to drop out. The entire procedure takes about 3 to 5 minutes, and it's probably the best use of 3 to 5 minutes in the entire evaluation. So I encourage you to adopt this into your very next evaluation. So section number 2 of CCR 40 says, and this is something that we're required to disclose. These are called the disclosure requirements. This is something that we're required to disclose to the injured worker before commencing the evaluation. It says that we're required to disclose to the injured worker and let them know that they, the injured worker, they may discontinue the evaluation based upon what's referred to as good cause. If they have good cause, they can discontinue the evaluation with you, which if that happens, let me tell you, potential trouble is right around the corner. You do not want the examinee to discontinue the evaluation. In fact, the whole objective of your evaluation is to arrive at a completed evaluation, that they have not exercised their option to discontinue, which they have that option under this particular regulation. So what is good cause? What constitutes good cause? Well, the first component of good cause would be an example of discriminatory conduct. So there we go. There we have that word. Discriminatory, biased, stereotyped behavior, stereotyped discriminatory conduct by the evaluator towards the worker based on these various targets of bias, these various categories, such as race, sex. Sex refers to gender, national origin, religion, or sexual preference, or any of the other targets of bias, those that are listed and not listed here. Okay, these are just a few examples, but these aren't the only examples. Or number two, any evidence of abusive, hostile, or rude behavior by us as the qualified medical evaluator, or any other type of behavior that clearly demonstrates a bias. A bias. So here's these words are actually written into the language of CCR 40 that demonstrate a bias against the social outgroup of injured workers in general. Isn't this fascinating how all of this all of the dots start to get connected? Or finally, number three, and perhaps less important for this discussion, but also an opportunity for the injured worker to discontinue the evaluation, is when there's an instance where the evaluator requests the worker to submit to an unnecessary exam or procedure, which might be considered abusive, rude, or discriminatory conduct as well. So this is important. This is something that we need to inform the injured worker or disclose to the injured worker prior to the face-to-face evaluation, that they indeed can pull the plug, that they have an escape hatch. They have an out clause. If they get a weird vibe from you as the qualified medical evaluator, they don't have to put up with that. And their rights are written into law. The law is CCR 40, California Code of Regulation, gives them the right to discontinue the evaluation with you if they feel that you're discriminatory, that you're biased, or that in any way you're not a neutral, objective, and unbiased evaluator. So this is something that has been ongoing for decades. I've been doing this procedure in the face-to-face evaluation with my examinees for perhaps 15 years. When I first learned of this, I immediately adopted this procedure. It's been required. It is required. It will always be required. And now the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to increase its monitoring to ensure that each and every one of us comply with the requirements of this regulation known as the disclosure requirements. Okay, next, and again in an effort to address existing QMEs, is a new mandatory declaration that's now written into the new regulations under CCR 35.5. This new declaration is going to go into the disclosures or declarations section, generally at the end of your report, along with your other mandatory declarations as well. And the language of this one is not written into law. You can draft this in any way that you see fit. I've recently drafted my own version of this declaration, but the intention of the declaration is what your written declaration should capture. Okay, and the spirit of the declaration is for you to remind yourself and to ask yourself and to confirm for yourself that your reporting is neutral, it's unbiased, it's objective, and it's not discriminatory in any way. So the exact language of Section H of CCR 35.5 says, each reporting evaluator shall include in the report a declaration under penalty of perjury that the evaluator, meaning you, did not discriminate in any way against the parties to the action. The parties. You didn't discriminate against the claims administrator. You didn't discriminate against the injured worker. You didn't discriminate against the employer or any of the other parties to the action. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that fascinating? You didn't discriminate against the injured worker in the evaluation process or in the content of the report. So this is something that's going to be installed into your report at the very end of your report, along with all of your other declarations as well. And this serves as the final check for you to confirm before you sign that report, date that report, and send that report off to the parties. It's a final check for you to confirm to yourself as well as to the parties. Here you're declaring to the parties, you're shouting to the parties that you did not discriminate in any way against any of the parties to the action, either in the evaluation or in the opinions and conclusions of your final report. And when you can get a head nod to that for yourself, only then should you sign that report and submit that report, because this declaration is signed under penalty of perjury. And if any of the parties object to your report on the basis that it contains discriminatory opinions or conclusions, those reports are going to be tracked, and I'll share with you how the Division of Workers' Compensation will deal with that particular issue next. Okay, so before we talk about how the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to deal with that next, let's talk about one more aspect of the continuing education requirements. Again, for those of us who are existing and ongoing QMEs, this is going to be an ongoing requirement to keep bias and the elimination of bias at the forefront of our awareness. So CCR 55B now talks about the new continuing education requirements, which the old continuing education requirements were that we complete 12 hours every 2 years of continuing education in the general category of what's referred to, or what was referred to in the law, as disability evaluation. So that was a very non-specific category, and almost anything would qualify as continuing education for qualified medical evaluators. I can say this because I'm a continuing education provider, and over the years I've produced dozens and dozens of continuing education programs on a wide variety of topics that may or may not be appropriate topics under this particular regulation, but that were appropriate under the old language of the old regulation. Well, under the new regulation, the continuing education topics are mandatory. So let's go over these mandatory topics. 4 hours of the new 16-hour QME continuing education requirement, 4 hours must be devoted to instruction in disability impairment rating. Disability impairment rating. And these are going to be the requirements. These requirements are going to apply for renewals after 4/1/26. So we have a little bit of leeway before these are going to be required, but here's what is going to be required for renewals after 4/1/26. So there's the first 4 hours. 3 hours is going to be required to include instruction in medical legal report writing, and I think that's a good thing. We should always continue to learn about how to write better reports. And then here's new instruction, 2 hours of instruction every 2 years in anti-bias training, which meets the qualifications outlined in Regulation 11, which we just talked about. Component number 1 is understanding of implicit bias and stereotyping. Number 2 is an example of gender bias that involves an inaccurate apportionment determination. And number 3 is an example of a breast cancer case and all of the implications that breast cancer can have on the disability rating for injured workers diagnosed with industrial breast cancer. So those 3 specific requirements are going to have to be repeated every 2 years. So you can glean from this that the Division of Workers' Compensation considers these 3 issues to be extremely important for us in moving forward as a group. So important that they require that we revisit these issues every 2 years. And then in addition, we're going to be required to do 2 hours of instruction in case law, 1 hour of instruction in the proper application of the new medical legal fee schedule, and then there will be 4 hours available for elective topics. The point for today's discussion is that this new anti-bias training is going to be required. It's required that we complete 2 hours of anti-bias training every 2 years. And then the final arm of the DWC's plan to combat bias in the medical legal evaluation has to do with our reappointment application, which we have to reapply, as you know, every 2 years. And I don't know about you, but every 2 years when I submit my reappointment application, I always cross my fingers that nothing's going to crop up that would interfere with my reappointment of my QME credential. But this is a new consideration that we have to contend with, and it has to deal with bias in our evaluations. So our reappointment can be denied if it can be found that we have a pattern and practice of failing to render expert opinions or conclusions without regard to an injured worker's race, sex, meaning gender, national origin, religion, or sexual preference. In other words, such that our opinions are not biased and are not based on stereotypes. If we fail at this, and we do demonstrate a pattern and practice of issuing inaccurate opinions and conclusions, the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to exercise their authority to deny our reappointment as a qualified medical evaluator. How are they going to do that? They do that by monitoring our reports, and they're going to do that by monitoring complaints that may issue about our evaluations. So the second opportunity related to bias and related to our conduct has to deal with section number 12, which says, if the Division of Workers' Compensation discovers that we have a pattern and practice of participating in 3 or more, this is very generous, okay, this is very generous. It doesn't say 1 or more, it doesn't say 2 or more. They give us tremendous benefit of the doubt by allowing as many as 3 or more instances of activity during the most recent period of appointment, the most recent 2-year period of appointment, that constitute a failure to communicate with the injured worker in a respectful, courteous, and professional manner. And you need to remember this. This is part of the QME ethical requirements under CCR 40, which aligns very, very closely with the disclosure requirements under CCR 40. I'm sorry, the ethical requirements are under CCR 41. The CCR 41 and 40 align very closely and deal with our behavior and our conduct with the injured worker. Well, if the injured worker goes on to document that our behavior was inappropriate, wasn't courteous, wasn't professional, wasn't respectful, and if you have a pattern and practice of that and it becomes discovered, the Division of Workers' Compensation is going to utilize the opportunity and their authority to weed you out from the system, such that the system progressively becomes less and less what? Less and less discourteous, less and less unprofessional, less and less disrespectful to injured workers. And the reason this is written into law is because these problems have become a problem for the Division of Workers' Compensation, who has to continually respond to these complaints about unprofessional, disrespectful, discourteous evaluators. So much so that they have a plan for weeding those particular evaluators out of the system. So doctors, isn't that fascinating? You know, when you review that plan spans the entire life cycle of the QME career, from inception, even before the QME sits for the competency examination, all the way through the active period of the QME's career, all the way to the terminus when the QME decides to call it quits. This plan spans the entire life cycle. The purpose of the plan is to educate us constantly about these problems of bias, discrimination, stereotyping, discourteous, and unprofessional conduct, all of which have as their net effect, if you think about this, the net effect of all of these problems is to impact, adversely and inaccurately impact, the benefits that are provided to injured workers. And the whole purpose of this plan is to improve accuracy such that injured workers receive exactly the benefits to which they are entitled to or not entitled to. Nobody has any problem with accuracy. All parties seek accuracy from us as qualified medical evaluators, and the accuracy of our opinions and conclusions are going to be constantly improved and ratcheted up through the implementation of the DWC's new plan to combat bias in the medical legal evaluation. So I encourage you to take these ideas to heart and to take the spirit of these ideas to heart and take a hard look at you yourself and at your evaluations and constantly strive to be a more neutral, more objective, and more unbiased evaluator. I've done this myself, and I'm constantly asking myself and encouraging myself to be more and more accurate and less biased in each and every one of my own evaluations, and I'm encouraging you to do the same as well. Now, in our next session, we're going to pick up and we're going to talk about some more of the new QME regulations and as to how and what they have to say about our evaluation and our reporting guidelines. So I look forward to being with you on our next session as we continue our new program entitled Update on the New QME Regulations. So for now, this is Dr. Terry Carpenter. I want to thank you for your commitment to excellence. I want to thank you for going the extra mile, for taking the extra energy, the extra time, and the extra effort to provide accurate opinions and conclusions for California's injured workers. For now, I'm wishing you best of success in your career as a qualified medical evaluator.